Thank you, the lovely Jane. We have so much love between us and all of us here, right? All right, so let us prepare our minds and heart with a brief meditation before I begin to talk. Before you go away. Come back, Tim, come back. All right, and Tim will play softly as we just reflect. We just heard from the daily word about beauty and beauty in our lives. And so let's just take a moment in silence, in quiet, and reflect on the beauty in our lives, in all the ways, in the people, in places, in things that are beautiful, that impact our lives. So let us straighten up, be on the floor, close our eyes, block out all that has happened, all that is happening, focusing our minds, our hearts, and our spirits on the beauty in our lives, in silence while Tim plays. Take a deep cleansing breath as we bring our minds and our attention back to our service. Open our eyes. If you need to stretch, stretch. Bring yourself back, wiggle your toes. Whatever helps you bring back and get grounded. So welcome back. All right, so as the lovely Jane mentioned, my talk for today is stir up the gift. Stir up the gift. This past spring, Reverend Carol led a metaphysical Bible interpretation class, and I remember some people here were there in that class this spring. I think she did it last spring or sometime last year and sometime the year before. And each time I took the class with her, I learned more and more. And I really appreciate it because you know, there's different feelings about the Bible that we have. But wherever you are, whatever your feelings about the Bible, here in Unity, we have a particular interpretation of the Bible, a metaphysical interpretation. So it's not the literal interpretation of the Bible, it's seeking the meta above, right? So there's an interpretation that we have here in line with our Unity teaching. And so back in that class, I thought to myself, we had a homework assignment to pick a verse from the Bible and then to come back to the class and interpret it. And for some reason, this verse has been on my mind at that time and still now. So I'm going to use that verse for our time here today. And it comes from the New Testament, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. I'll read the verse by itself first, then I'll give you a little bit of context, and then we'll get into the talk. Okay, sound good?
Yes.
Okay, all right. You look like you're ready to hear it. Like, bring it on. Bring it on, I'm ready. All right, here's 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. For this reason, I remind you to stir up the gift which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Now here's another version of the Bible, and this is how they say it. For this reason, I remind you to fan into the flame of the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So that is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. Now let me give you a little background about what's happening here in these verses, and then I'll give you some more of it. But the context is, this is a letter. This 2 Timothy is a letter, and it's a letter written by Paul to Timothy. And in this letter, he is encouraging him. So let me give you a couple of the verses before the verse we just read, and then the verse to put it in context. So you can imagine yourself, Paul, listening in to this letter, Paul speaking to Timothy. And this is what he says. I thank God, whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as clear as day and night. I constantly remember you in my prayers. And I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother, Lois, and in your mother, Eunice. And I am persuaded now lives in you. So that's the passage in context. And so Paul is reminding Timothy of his heritage, a heritage of faith that was passed down from his foremothers. And he told Timothy at the end, stir up the gifts. He said, I'm persuaded, I believe you have the gift, stir up the gift. And in this context, he's talking to Timothy about his gift of faith, his particular gift of faith. But for our talk and our time here for today, I want to remind us all what Paul reminded Timothy, and that is to stir up the gifts. Now, here in Unity, we come from a tradition of stirring up gifts. Did you know that? Some say yes, some say no, some say keep going. All right, so let me just say, for example, you might say, well, what are gifts? What gifts are you talking about? I'll say more about that later, but I'll say a little bit right now. The gift I'm talking about when I say stir up the gift is the gift that you have. You all have. We all have, and we talked about this earlier. We all have a gift. Many God-given gifts. But often we overlook them. We don't even pay attention to them because they're so naturally inherent and ingrained in us. So those are the gifts. I'm calling you to wake up those gifts and stir up those gifts in you. All right, and I'll say more about that later. But for now, I want to say, we come from, when I say we, I mean unity. Those of us in unity, we come from a tradition of people stirring up their gifts, using their gifts, those natural abilities that they have that just come out of them. And the first person I want to start with, who I would consider to be the grandmother of our unity teaching, and she is Emma Curtis Thompson. In the 1800s, she was a unity teacher, well, not a unity, a New Thought teacher, spiritual leader, mystic, healer, writer. And she influenced so many New Thought and unity teachers that stem directly from her teaching. So Emma Curtis Thompson was a powerful teacher and leader. And her teachings trickled out, and guess who stumbled upon them? Myrtle Fillmore. Now I know you might look at Jane Leonard, you might see Myrtle Fillmore. So if you have any questions about Myrtle Fillmore, we have our resident expert right here. But what we do know is Myrtle Fillmore is a co-founder of Unity with her husband, Charles Fillmore, right? But she was influenced by the teaching of Emma Curtis Thompson. And that helped her do the work that she did. She did the teaching and helped with the healing. She focused on prayer. And then her husband, Charles Fillmore, he used his own gifts. At the time when she had her experience, he was an established businessman. So he had gifts of organization and structure. So he helped her bring her teachings together, and they created unity. So they used their gifts. So I'm calling Emma Curtis Thompson our unity grandmother, and I'm calling Myrtle Fillmore our unity mother. All right, so keep that in mind. They use their gifts, so I'm encouraging you to use yours. So that question you had earlier, what gifts? What are these gifts you speak of? What do you mean by them? This is what I mean. I'll say what I said before. You have gifts. Everyone here, you have many gifts. But you take them for granted because they come to you so easily and so naturally, you almost just miss them. But every now and then, someone might compliment you on a gift, and you say, oh, that thing? You might not even recognize it. You'll just kind of dismiss it, like, why are they even mentioning that? Now raise your hand if you ever had that experience. Like, oh, you have. Oh, I can't resist. Somebody tell me, give me an example of what it was, what the thing was. Was it you baked that cake, or somebody tell me what the thing was somebody complimented you on? Anybody remember? And you're like, you can't. No? Okay, I'll give you time. Don't go away. Don't put your minds there. Come back. We'll get some time to think about it. All right, I'll give you some kind of prompts to help think about that. All right. So, but I'm talking about those things that come naturally, nature, God. It's in us. It's in our creation. It's a part of our creativity. These things come, this is how you know what your gifts are. They come easily to you and hard to others. Like I say, people might, they're like raving about it, and you're like, what are they talking about? All right, so now, take a moment and just think for a moment. If there's something that comes to your mind, I'm not going to ask you about it, because you're like, oh no, don't ask me. Look, don't ask me about it. This will be your homework. A teacher by profession, so this is your homework. For the rest of the week, start now, but think about 3 things that you do very naturally. Pay attention to what people compliment you on. See what your gifts are. And I'm going to say more about that later, but for now, just take a moment, see if anything comes to your mind. Something that comes easily to you and may be hard for others. I'll give you an example from my own life. Maybe it'll stimulate you thinking about this. I'll give you an example from my sister, Leanne. All right, she and I just came back from a vacation last month. It was fabulous. And for months before the vacation, she planned every single thing. Every step, every turn. I mean, she wrote it down, she sent me texts, and by the time the vacation came, all I had to do was show up wherever she said and do the things she laid out. Now that comes very easily to her. For me, that attention to detail, I have no tolerance for it. I mean, I drift off, I will forget things, I drop the ball because it's just not one of my gifts. It's a natural ability for her. It comes to her naturally. So I'm giving you these examples to help you think about what you might consider small things, like her gift of organization or her gift of paying attention to detail. Those are gifts, those natural abilities. You were created with those, why they flow out so naturally. All right, let me give you an example to encourage you and help you think about your own from a conversation I just had last night, with my friend Susan. So I'm on the phone with her and she's telling me about how she's been looking for these new curtains. Yes, gifts show up in curtains. So she's talking about these curtains. She's been wanting these curtains. She has a particular look she wants for her room, and there's a particular kind of leaf and color she wants on these curtains. She ordered a pair, and it's just not quite, but she's using them, but just not quite. And then she says to me, I should have just made some curtains. I could just whip up a pair of curtains, just like that. And I said, what did she say? Whip up a pair of curtains? How do you whip up curtains? And this was going on in my mind, and I said to her, did you say whip up curtains? And she said, yeah. I said, that sounds to me like some Jedi Knight trick. I have no concept of what you can do to just make curtains, and it sounds like make them quickly. This is a natural ability of hers. You know, I said to you, it sounds like something that comes easily to somebody else and hard for others. That came easily to Susan. For me, maybe, you know, somebody can walk me through it, I can watch some YouTube videos. I could probably get it done, but whip up, never. Probably take me days and days and days. So it's hard for me, but easy for her, which may illustrate her ability to use her hands. There are lots of other gifts in their creativity, because you have to see what you want them to look like. So those are examples of your gifts, and you have those. And I'm coming back to this admonishment of stir up the gifts. All right, so now, why, you might say, what's the point? Why do we need to use our gifts? Why do we need to stir up our gifts? Because you were created with the gifts, and it is an expression of your inner divinity. In Unity, we teach we are one with God. The Bible says in Genesis 1:27 that we were created in the image of God. And we believe that in Unity. And in your image of God, you have creativity in you. You have gifts in you. And so for you, when you pay attention to and focus and use your gifts, it's a way to be in alignment with your God self. And what comes from that is fulfillment, a sense of purpose. Now, with that example from Susan, it's not to say that she has to go now and be a seamstress, because remember I said you have many gifts, but I'm trying to bring you to start thinking about them. Just start thinking about them. But when you start using them, you're getting connected all the more and in alignment with your divine nature. You have tons, I'm convinced right now, probably right now off the top of my head, I can probably go around and say you each have at least 10 I can think of at the top of my head. But when you focus and pay attention to them and zero in on them and use them, it helps you come into divine connection and alignment. So that's the why. All right. So now you might say, well, what do you mean use them? What does this stir up mean? Stir up means exactly that, to use them. And here's I'll give you 3 ways to stir up your gifts. 3 ways. The first one is to do your homework. Anybody remember the homework I just gave you? Nobody remembers. What was the homework assignment? Something about homework. Identify your gifts. Identify your gifts. I'm like, well, how do I know? So find out what they are. Well, I don't know. You started thinking about it a little bit. Ask the people around you that are close to you, that know you and love you and that you trust. You ask them, what would you say I'm good at? What would you say? You'd be surprised, or maybe you'll affirm what you already know. So your first thing to do is to identify them, and that's one way you can do it. I'm going to mention all 3, and then I'm going to go back. So the first one, know them, identify them. The second one, once you know at least what a few are, start paying attention to them. Don't just forget about it. Yeah, that was cute. I know my kids. I'm cool. Pay attention when they show up. When you find yourself doing this thing or doing that thing, pay attention. That's 2. And number 3, use them in service to someone or something beyond yourself. So first you're going to find out what they are. You want to know them. You want to pay attention to them. And the third thing, you want to use them in service. All right, so now I'm going to say a little bit more about each one of the 3. So hopefully it helps you remember and actually go out and do your homework. All right. Know them. Ask yourself this question. Maybe if you have time of meditation or you journal, however you connect with yourself, get quiet, however you do that, ask yourself. Some real dedicated, focused time. Let me think about this. What comes easily to me? Maybe at the end of the night, go through your day. Think about the activities of the day. What came easy? What, if anything, happened that you were doing and the time flew by so fast You're like, oh, wait, oh, the time went by so fast. Is it lunchtime already? I didn't even realize. Which I would never forget lunchtime. But if you, if you're doing an activity or doing whatever you're doing and you lose track of time, that's an indicator. You lose a sense of time and what's going on. That's an indicator that you're using your gifts. So we're talking about how you know them. So start keeping track, and think about your day, whatever you've done that day, and what really energized you. What was the thing that really energized you? That's an indicator of your gift. I was in a meeting with someone. We were starting a meeting for work, and I felt so tired and drained, and I was like, oh no, this meeting. And then they said, well, we don't have everybody in attendance, so we're going to cancel the meeting. Immediately, I got energized. All of a sudden, I was like, I had all this energy to do this other thing I wanted to do. But for that, I didn't have any energy. So pay attention. Pay attention for you for those indicators and clues. And then when you do, think about, this is the third thing, use them in service. When Jane talked about the unity principles, the beliefs, the ideas that make up unity beliefs, and the fifth one was live your truth, that's what we believe here. Live it, put it into practice. So use your gifts in service. It could be in some official capacity or unofficial capacity. It could be with your profession or your job or not. It could be with your people, your family, your friends, your community, or it could be here at Unity of the West Side. Now let me give you one last story, which you probably will find this unbelievable. Like, I can't believe this is a true story, but it is a true story. And Jane, I don't think I've shared this story with you. But when I first came here at Unity several years ago, and I knew sacred service is what Unity calls volunteer service, right? Sacred service was important here. So I went to Reverend Carol and I said, I'm new here and I'd like to volunteer to do sacred service. What service do you need that I, can volunteer for? And she said, well, we have the fellowship hall in the back and we need some more volunteers. We need somebody to make the coffee. I said, okay. Okay. All right, so next week you want to start? Okay, next Sunday I'll start. So all week long, I'm like panic stricken. Believe it or not, I don't drink coffee. I don't know what coffee tastes like. I never made coffee. So I say to my friends, whoever would listen to me, I said, oh no, I gotta make coffee at church next week. And you're looking at me like, what's the big deal? I'm like, I don't know how to make coffee. And I really did. I worried all week long about this coffee, and somebody showed me how to use the machine, but I was all this worry because I thought people who like coffee like their coffee. I know that much about coffee drinkers, and they like it a certain way. And if I don't make it in the way they like, I'm not doing my service. So I had a lot of stress about that. So then that was my job that, I did it, I don't know how many weeks. And then the person who was doing the service assistant role, which is the role that Jane was taking today, leading us through the service, one of the persons who had that role, she left. And so the board member at the time, the board president at the time, came to me and said, would you be willing to do the service assistant role? I said to myself, hallelujah. I don't have to make the coffee. I was so glad, because making coffee is not one of my gifts. Go ahead.
Is your last name Carrie?
And that whole machine and how people love that thing, really, I was like,
You don't have to know how to make coffee.
I didn't even know how to put the little cups in. I was worried about that. I really was. And so when they knew that, I was a teacher, they thought, well, maybe you'd like to speak. And so then I thought, oh, now I get to use something that comes naturally to me. Speaking in front of a group, which for somebody else, like my sister, for example, she would hate that. It comes hard to her, but easy to me. So this is an example of how you can use your gifts. But first find them, pay attention to them, and then use them in service. And so now as I make my way to take my seat, let me say this. And let me echo Paul's message to Timothy. Remember we started with Paul's message to Timothy? Let me echo those verses and say to you, I am reminded of your gifts from God, which lived in Unity's spiritual grandmother, Emma Curtis Hopkins, and which lived in Unity's spiritual mother, Myrtle Fillmore. So for this reason, I am reminding you to stir up the gifts that I am persuaded lives in you. Stir up your gifts in a way that the teachings of Unity has passed down to us. Stir up your gifts. Namaste.